Republicans may not be on the same page as the American people, but now it looks like they're not even on the same page as other Republicans. Last week, Speaker John Boehner stripped 4 Tea Party Republicans of their committee seats, apparently for refusing to toe the party line. Many conservatives were outraged. Some even started a movement to fire Boehner from his leadership post. Now Boehner's trying to calm the storm with a letter to the lawmakers in the so-called Tea Party purge. But at least one of them isn't buying it. Kansas Congressman Tim Huelskamp says, quote, "With this letter, Speaker Boehner has confirmed a secret scorecard was used to punish conservative Republican congressmen. This decision by GOP leadership in a closed-door backroom session confirms the worst fears of the American people, that promises transparency were simply an election year Republican ploy." This is a real fight within the Republican Party. Joining me now, Congressman Tim Huelskamp, Republican from Kansas, who was stripped of his committee assignment. First of all, Congressman, thank you for being here tonight.
Reverend, thank you for allowing me to be on.
Let me ask you about this. Do you stand by those pretty harsh words against Speaker Boehner?
Yeah, not only do I stand by him, I think it's very clear by numerous sources there was a secret scorecard. And what outrages me, and most importantly outrages my constituents, is if you don't vote a certain way, whether you're Republican or Democrat, you get punished in Washington, D.C. You know, we're sitting here looking for solutions to big problems. The last thing we need to be doing is punishing people for petty, vindictive things, and I think that's what's going on. I have no explanation from our leadership. They won't tell us why they kicked us off of committees, other than this rumor. Looks like a pretty clear rumor that there's a secret scorecard if you didn't vote the way. I'm a conservative. That's what my constituents wanted me to vote. They wanted me to do that in Washington. You and I disagree, but I've got to answer to folks back home, not anybody here in Washington, D.C.
Now, could you see yourself supporting Mr. Boehner for Speaker?
Well, I tell people we've got major decisions before the end of the year, and here there's a lot of media attention, but the real attention should be on this massive $16.3 trillion debt, this fiscal cliff, but most importantly, this debt crisis next year. And so I'm not talking about what's going to happen in February or what's going to happen in January. What I want to talk about is how do we solve this problem? How do we get the Speaker and the President actually open up that back door? I mean, they're all sitting there making backroom deals. Open it up and let the American people let you see what's going on. I want to see what's going on. They won't tell either side what the deal making's going on. And at the end of the day, I don't think that's the way to make policy, and that's not the way to build up the trust of the American people.
Now, as you said, you and I may not agree, and we've debated on this show, though you've always come on. Are you saying that as you ran to try and stand up for your conscience, stand up for what you believe, even if others disagree, that you believe that Speaker Boehner has a scorecard and is punishing you and 3 others for standing up and voting for what you believe to be right?
That is apparently the case. Again, we wrote a letter, the 3 conservative freshmen that were removed, we wrote a letter to the Speaker, and I think if you read the language of the letter, you work through all the Washingtonese, and you see, oh yes, there was a scorecard, and we were graded a certain way, graded down because we wanted to balance the budget. And frankly, again, I can disagree with the Speaker, but my folks are very clear. We've got to solve this problem now, and it's a spending problem, and shouldn't be punished because I vote the way people want me to vote back in Kansas.
Now, when you say that the President and the Speaker need to come and solve the problem, not in the back room, the American people are saying 65% of those that are polled say they want compromise. The Congress should make a compromise for the deal. Do you agree with that?
Well, I don't like to use the word compromise very often. I think we work together. But there are principles that I hold that I can't compromise and give up those principles. But we can meet in the middle. We can say, hey, we've got a problem in the future. We've got to look at reforming entitlements. The president's agreed to that. Both sides have agreed to that. Hopefully we could come to a deal before the end of the year. But I'll tell you, I'm not very optimistic.
I mean, what's wrong with the compromise? You don't like to use the word compromise? If you talk about come to the middle, that means some are going to have to give and some are going to have to take.
Well, there are folks that say we have to raise taxes. The president believes if we raise taxes, that's going to solve our problem. And I disagree. I think most economists disagree. And the studies show if we raise taxes the way the president would like to have us raise taxes, it's going to cost anywhere from 200,000 to 700,000 Americans their job. I don't think that's a solution. That's what I say. I don't believe that's the right solution.
But I think the president is saying that we have to raise taxes on people that are making $250,000 or more. He's not talking about raising taxes on middle-class people.
Well, I think he's willing to raise taxes on the middle class and the poor folks if he is not given his increase on the folks making $200,000 or more a year. I mean, that's what worries me, that he's willing to tax everyone.
Why would you or I want to risk the middle class and the poor on behalf of the rich people? Why don't we just give them that?
Because I don't want to lose jobs. We need to create jobs. We need to grow the economy. And every study I've seen is that raising taxes on small businessmen, that's what I have in my district. It's not big corporations, it's small businessmen and women. Raise taxes on them doesn't create any more jobs. And 2 years ago, that's what the president said. You don't raise taxes in the middle of an economic downturn. Okay. We're still in that economic downturn, and that's where I think we can come together and realize we want to get some jobs. Grow the economy.
That's what we need is jobs and coming together. So let me give you another study since you quoted studies. When you look at under President Clinton, there was a net growth of 23 million jobs with no tax cuts to the rich. In fact, he raised taxes. Under President Bush, the net growth was just 3 million with the tax cuts to the rich. So clearly you don't need to give a tax cut to the rich to create jobs when there's a $20 million job swing between Clinton and Bush, and they had total different tax policies.
Yeah, there has been growth in the economy despite what's going on in Washington. But what one constituent told me is if you want to return to Clinton-era tax rates, why don't we return to Clinton-era spending? We've got a spending problem. $1 trillion of debt, and the tax increases the president's talking about raise anywhere from $60 to $80 billion. That sounds like a lot of money, but in Washington, D.C., that's about 1 week of spending. The problem is we've got 51 weeks of overspending. And so we can talk about raising taxes, but we got to grow the economy. And what I see is if you raise taxes on small businesses, you raise taxes on farmers and ranchers in my district with this death tax, for example, that's going to cripple small businesses. I'm not worried about GE. I mean, they've got a seat at the table at the White House. I'm worried about the small guys that get hammered, that don't have a legion of tax attorneys that get to play this tax code. So I believe we need a fundamental tax reform. I think the president agrees with that as well. But
if you're worried about the debt, and I think we've got to deal with the debt, according to the Congressional Budget Office, you'd pick up $950 billion over 10 years by just letting the tax cuts for the rich or those making over $250 a year go for 10 years. You have $950 billion covered right there. That's a huge step toward the deficit.
Well, when you have $1 trillion of excess spending in 1 year, what are we going to do for the other 9 years? It's a spending problem. We're spending too much money. And the deficit has shot up since the president took office for a number of reasons. Like I said, let's go back to Clinton-era spending. If we went back to those rates when we had a Republican House and a Republican Senate and Democrat president, they got along.
But I think that I think the president has put spending on the table, and some of us are concerned about where that goes. But are you willing to start with the tax cut for people over 250? There's $950 billion there. Let's start there. And then let's go from there, talk about spending or whatever else you want. Are you willing to at least engage in that?
No, I am not willing to let the president hold 98% of the population hostage by saying, hey, unless you raise taxes on the 2% that I've demonized during the campaign. He's holding up middle class tax relief just to get the 2%, which doesn't solve the problem.
I think what he said, Congressman, is let's agree on giving them the 98% their tax cuts now, and we can argue later about the rich, or let's have the rich pay their taxes or have their tax cuts increase. He's saying let's free them right now. He's willing right now for you and him and the Congress to cut that deal right now. That's not holding them hostage. That's freeing them. I think it's the other side saying, no, we're not going to free them until you give us what we want for the rich.
No, I agree with the president from 2 years ago. 2 years ago, Al, he said, don't raise taxes on anybody. He said that. And I agree with him. It's not the time to raise taxes. We can argue back and whenever the economy starts growing again, then we can talk about it. But we've got a spending problem. The president has not put any spending cuts on the table, no specifics, and many times our side hasn't done that either. I've been critical of leadership. Show us how you're going to balance the budget, because the debt is the problem. It's a spending problem.
Well, I think the debt is the problem, and that's why I put out what I did, the figures that, not me, the Congressional Budget Office, I've got to leave it there. But I think we just had an election on that. The president ran on it and won on it. But
I won too, I won, as did a majority of Republicans in the House, and we have a mandate as well, and we have a mandate not to raise taxes. But we have a mandate to cut spending and solve this debt problem.
I think that is something that we're going to have to deal with if we're going to solve the debt problem. And I think you ought to tell the Speaker, you have a mandate. Don't let him push you around, Congressman. I'm on your side on that one.
We will continue to do that. My constituents are saying the same thing. Huelskamp, we didn't send you to Washington to vote for anybody else. You're supposed to vote for Kansans, not folks in Washington, D.C.
And the middle-class Kansans that don't make $250,000 a year. Tim Huelskamp, thank you for your time tonight. Ahead.